Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If you didn't notice, we inched this forward about 15 minutes. So if you guys jump in at 9:15 or anytime throughout this, or if you're listening back to this, it's okay. It's going to be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn. So you'll be able to catch the full episode. But David Spencer is our guest today, and he is a very busy man with a very busy schedule. And so we are going to go ahead and make sure we can fit in a full 30-minute conversation here today. So we bumped it up just a little bit to accommodate his schedule. David, thank you so much for making it work and joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Samantha. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for accommodating changing schedules and being flexible. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. So, David, you are the VP of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics. I actually really love that title. It's pretty unique, I think, right now in the industry. But can you kind of explain to me a little bit more about what that means and what you do in your current role, and maybe a little background on yourself as well?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's certainly a role that I've kind of worked my way into a little bit over the years here at Arrive, and certainly over the 6 years I've been here. The business has looked very different as we've kind of been in a pretty strong growth story or growth phase over those 6 years, and the needs of the business have changed, right? Coming in, I held roles largely around reporting and data infrastructure, and even the first data scientist here at Arrive reported to me, which is kind of wild, but involved with pricing and things like that, and paying attention to the market and understanding how that affects our business and the business of the shippers and the carriers we work with, and how to steer the ship, so to speak. That's something we've just put a lot more formality around and put a little bit more resources into, and kind of bundle that up under this market intelligence umbrella. So it's certainly a really cool role to be in, and certainly something that over time Arrive has become more ready for as we've grown and built out expertise in some of these other areas that we had to get to another level of maturity first, before then. But yeah, I mean, I've been in freight since 2011, so about 12 years now, and really held data roles most of the time, and data pricing type roles, and been paying attention to the freight market the whole time. So really, I consider that to be sort of the sort of strong point of what I bring to the table.
I love when we say like late 2000s dates, like 2011, and I'm like, yeah, like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And then we get a reminder of how old we are, because like, no, that's actually been quite a while now. So that's awesome. And, I've followed you for the last couple of years. We connected probably a little over a year ago. And I'm really excited to have you on, because this is exactly what we talk about here on this show, is economics and freight markets. And you live truly in both of those worlds on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's really awesome. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what the market intelligence means to Arrive, or maybe to the people that you are producing market intelligence for? What is market intelligence when we're talking about freight markets, right?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think, we try and keep it pretty simple, right? I think ultimately, you can get pretty lost in this stuff and go, deep dive, and there's graduate degrees on the freight market, right? And those with a lot of extra education studying this stuff. But I think really what we try and do is we simplify a bit, right? Like ultimately the dynamics of the freight market come down to supply and demand, right? So how do we think about breaking down the individual components of how much freight is out there on the road, how many trucks are out there to service that freight, and what direction do we see both of those sort of components trending, and trying to simplify the story in those terms in order to help, as we think through what decisions need to be made here around a freight brokerage or with the shippers we work with.
Okay, so let's jump right in. You guys produce a monthly intelligence report. And can you kind of help me understand what are some of the data points that you guys are looking at on a consistent basis? Just kind of take me behind the scenes, I guess, or not even so much behind the scenes because you publish all of this, but for anyone who hasn't had the chance to see this or check this out before, what things is it that your team finds important to stay up to date on that monthly basis that's going into your reports and your decision making, and kind of help us understand what are some of those sources that you guys are going to, and some of the data that ultimately we're thankful for people like you guys who take all that information, right, and then translate it for us so that we don't have to go out to the raw data sources and try to make sense of it ourselves. But what are those things that you guys are watching?
Yeah, it's a reading of the tea leaves, so to speak, right? We kind of have to look at all the various data sources, and there's a mix, right? There's free data, there's paid data, there's industry data providers, there's government data, there's people posting on social media. A lot of the guests that you've had on your show are some of those people that we'll regularly look to for insights and
Yeah.
for an understanding of what's going on. But it changes, right? I think there's a certain set of data that we look at that's pretty standard, right? What's going on with rates? What are the core indices showing, whether that's tender rejection data, from one of the providers we utilize, FreightWaves, Sonar platform, or load to truck ratios, data from DAT, or, someone like Act Research or FTR who focuses on what's going on with commercial vehicles, or what's going on in the trucking sector, and how the economy is affecting those sectors, right? So there's a lot of providers out there that are doing a lot of research, and we leverage that, right? In a lot of ways, we try not to do a lot of that heavy lifting, and look at, hey, what are all these experts saying, and how do you kind of streamline that into a narrative or into a story. And that's really the basis for what we try and put together, right? Is, hey, ultimately, all this information, what does that mean for trucking rates, right? Where are rates going? Where are they today? Where are they going? What does that mean for you as a participant in the industry?
Yeah, so let me kind of ask a question and kind of build on that. Ultimately, who is the audience? And I'm assuming that this is probably primarily geared towards your customers, Arrive's customers, or even potential customers that are out there in the market, but shippers, right? So, or even maybe other carriers or industry participants. Can you kind of help us understand? I think when you gave an introduction, you addressed this kind of slightly. I caught it in there where you said that like the needs of this type of work have evolved over the years. And I think that we're kind of at a point now where we understand that we can be a little bit more proactive here, right? As providers and as participants in this industry. And we don't have to be so reactive to, oh, the market, this, or it's changing, or now this, it's just a bad market. I think there's a lot more that we can do as just responsible participants in this industry to understand where we're at, where we're likely to be headed to, and kind of learn from the past or current data that we have available, and kind of just be more educated. So is an educational approach kind of the goal of this information, or what is your guys' end goal with this data that you're putting together?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, certainly educational component and its educational piece is important. But, one of the things we've really gotten a lot of engagement around is, as a transportation provider, putting some thought behind, the rates we're putting on an RFP, right? Like, hey, we're not just throwing darts here, right? We're doing a lot of research. We're putting intelligence behind our decision making, and putting this information out there. It matches what you're going to see from a pricing proposal from us, right?
Okay.
Hey, where do we think the market is going? That's based on this research. We're putting it out there to the world. Our thought is the more we can have participants all sort of acting off of the information, the intelligence that's out there, hopefully get more people making the right decisions, and more people moving in the right direction with the market, as opposed to being so reactive. Now, as well as I do, it's a reactionary game that we play, right? It's hard to keep up with what's going on. Oftentimes, when the market flips, we're forced to be very reactive because there's these big catalyst type black swan events that occur that
Global
cause it, right?
pandemics, everybody saw
Yeah,
that coming.
but yeah, I mean, it's really, I think, stepping back to your question, driving a conversation with those that we work with, and it's meant for more deeper relationships with these providers. It's helped open doors. It's really led to growth, and been a value add, as opposed to just, hey, we send in a truck and we hope it picks up on time, right? We're trying to be a better partner, and this has certainly been a part of that.
Do you guys see pretty good engagement from your customer base when they get these reports, or do you guys kind of welcome questions and open conversations around anything that might come up as they're reading these?
Yeah, for sure. I've seen a really strong engagement from the shipper side. It obviously depends on, who you're talking to. There's some shippers that are much more in tune with the market, and maybe they just want a quick touch point once a quarter, or, hey, are we reading this right? And then you get those that are like really, looking for more guidance. Hey, what are you seeing? Why? Give me a 30 to 60-minute presentation on, market trends. And so it's really across the board, and depending on, the shipper and their exposure to the market, you get different levels of interest, certainly. But we definitely think it's been worth the investment, and we've put, more headcount and resources towards it as a result.
Yeah, I think we sit in a very interesting spot in the brokerage space, right? Like, especially with a company the size and scale of Arrive Logistics, because while shippers and carriers probably all have like a core group of people that they can go to and say like, hey, what are you seeing? Hey, what are you seeing? And maybe you have like 3 or 5 other people that you talk to within your same side of the industry. But that's what's so unique about the brokerage space, is that we are talking to literally, you're talking to hundreds of carriers and hundreds of shippers on a weekly basis. And you're not just seeing these like macroeconomic data trends. You're literally living in the freight market at a large scale on a regular basis. So I think that that's always a resource to, when a shipper can come to you and say, hey, what are you hearing? What's going on? You're not just saying, well, I talked to 2 people this week and like, this is what's going on. It's like, hey, we have a pulse out there on the market across hundreds of our customers and carrier base. And this is what we're understanding. So I think that's really cool when you're able to kind of add that value, because you guys have such a great, just organic, if you will, like database with across your own customer base, right?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, you know how it is too, right? Once you start to build this network in this space with those that are engaged in talking about the freight market, you can kind of get situated pretty quickly, and the network kind of grows and communicates. And I think in general, the freight market or the participants are much more well informed thanks to podcasts like yours, or what Ken's doing, or what Jason Miller does on a daily basis, putting information out there.
That's
right?
dedication. Yes.
It's impressive, right? But I think there's a lot more information out there than when we were first getting started in the space. I think you'd have to wait for monthly data to come in and sort of analyze it to understood what happened, possibly up to 6 weeks ago, and making decisions off of that. Now there's much more real-time data and information available. A lot more people putting content out there, and I think it makes for a much healthier marketplace for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. And there's been a lot more push to really try to educate and understand and network across other people who have the same passions, I think, in the last couple of years in the social space. So very thankful for that. That's how we connected. So grateful for that as well. We've kind of talked about some of the great parts of all of this, right? But can you kind of talk to me a little bit about what are some of the challenging sides of forecasting, or the challenging sides of freight markets, or maybe the areas that still a little bit of a guess, or just not as clean as we would like it just based on what we have? But what are some of the stickier areas of this?
Yeah, I mean, well, market flips are very difficult to navigate. In time, right? I think one of the things we look at with forecasting, right, is it's probably, I wouldn't call it easy, but it's easier to forecast market vulnerability to disruption. Basically, hey, when is the market poised for some kind of flip if there is some sort of catalyst, right? But it's hard to predict those catalysts, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to predict the COVID. It's hard to predict the Hurricane Harvey or ELDs, right? ELDs, I guess, was something that was coming for a while, but it's harder to predict what actually is going to spark the moment in time where we see sort of the market flip and the momentum shift. And that's a challenge, right? I think that's something that is certainly something that we think about a lot, is this concept of vulnerability versus disruption, right? The market might be vulnerable to disruption. If we even look at this current market as we get into fourth quarter, early Q1, but are we going to see that catalyst, right? And is a catalyst needed? This is a discussion I've had with other experts in the industry. Is a catalyst actually needed to create inflationary conditions? And what does that catalyst look like? And I remember coming into 2020, you're looking at what's going on out there, and you're thinking, hey, like, there's no way a demand event is going to be what disrupts the market and brings it out of the down market we were in 2019. I'm like, it's got to be capacity related.
Yep.
And then COVID hits, right?
Yeah.
And so getting it right is really tough. I'm sure, right? You're in these conversations all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's just to your point. Just because it's unpredictable and it is never going to be perfect doesn't mean we don't try, right? It still means that we do the best we can to take educated, cautionary approaches to this, right? And it doesn't mean that there's a lot of companies who just don't want to say anything because they don't want to be wrong. I think it's okay to say, here's what we think based on the information we have available. I wouldn't go to Vegas with it. You know what I mean? Like we just are constantly surprised by this market because there's so many variables that impact it. And even on a smaller scale too, right? I mean, we just saw diesel fuel shoot up over 22 cents in a couple week period. And I think everybody felt pretty good about diesel fuel, coming down and staying low. And then all of a sudden, it's back up. So just little things like that, they might impact the way a carrier needs to operate or the way a broker needs to operate or the way a shipper, their budget is operating, right? So just our market is not at all independent, right? It is directly impacted by what's going on in the global economy, our domestic economy, and that kind of makes it pretty impossible, I think, to say one way or another what's going to happen. I remember, I don't know if you were there, but I was at a FreightWaves conference. It was the one that they had. It was the end of last year, and they had the economist up there, and he was like, there is no way we're avoiding a recession. It's happening next quarter. And everybody was so sure. And now you still have people who are like, I don't even think we've ever gone into an economic recession this year. Or are we going to go into one? And I'm like, man, a year ago, people were sure we were going to be in one already. So, the own volatility and just the macroeconomy is one thing too. And that directly impacts the freight markets to an extent. So there's no type of certainty, I think, to this game that we choose to play.
Yeah, a lot of factors, right? And you mentioned gas, right? Like food and gas, that's largely what drives consumer sentiment and consumer spending, right? A year ago, we were looking at, really high gas prices. And I think that was driving a lot of it, right? There's a lot of concern about inflation and inflation started to come down and, the consumer still remains pretty strong. Wages are up. The same story that's been kind of echoing around a little bit here, but it'd be interesting to see what happens with some of the other variables ahead, right? Like student loan repayment.
Talk to me about those. So let's get into that a little bit. What are we thinking for the current outlook for maybe current market, future market, or when this could all kind of start changing? What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, well, we know the market in itself has sort of its own seasonal components throughout the course of the year, right? And if you look at the rest of the year, the points of potential volatility are really around, a little bit around Labor Day and end of Q3. Historically, that's seen a little bit of volatility. And certainly not as much as we expect to see, in Q4 with retail peak season. And so as we start to look at retail peak season, you're looking at, imports or import outlook. I know Maersk just came out with some quotes yesterday around, their expectations for imports as we get into the fourth quarter are still that they're going to remain pretty soft. Inventory levels still remain, pretty high across the retail space. So, we're not really expecting anything other than sort of like a muted peak season as we get through the fourth quarter here. I think, all data is pointing towards, certainly some spot rate volatility. And if you got contract rates on, in the broker space, expect some, margin compression on your contract rate as spot rates come up a bit. But, the first point where I think it gets interesting is, there's this trend we've been noticing last few years between Christmas and sort of mid-January where carriers take a lot of carriers are taking time off their drivers around this time, capacity getting pulled off the road. That I'm really interested in that time period. I think if you compounded that with some severe winter weather, the market is starting to look a little more vulnerable at that point. So I think that's the first test of where we're at. It sort of becomes our mid-year, our 6-month check-in on where we're at. And I think if at that point we see some, heavy spot rate volatility, I think certainly by mid-year we're looking at it probably inflationary conditions coming from failed routing guides.
Right. And I think too, to your point, we might see some things on that on one side of the equation with maybe a little bit of a peak, maybe some weather, but we've also been seeing a pretty steady trend with the driver attrition rate, right? Right now with the owner operators and the small fleets that are still exiting the market. So as capacity continues to exit throughout the year, and then any type of weather or peak season type volumes, even if it's not much, we might just, or those drivers taking time off, that might kind of be just kind of lending from both sides of the table, if you will. Both the supply and demand side could potentially, I don't think we're looking at anything major at the end of this year, but it could kind of be just the start of this change.
I think the metrics to watch really are the tender rejection side, right? Because ultimately, is this spot volatility resulting in any compliance issues on the shipper side, right? Are you routing guide issues? Because through the summer peak season here, even though we saw certainly, normal seasonality in the spot market, a pickup, it didn't really disrupt routing guides that much on the shipper side, right? And so to get true inflationary or disruptive conditions, we would need to see routing guides get disrupted. And so, that's the big indicator I'm watching is, are we starting to see that tender rejection rate, in the high single digits or even low double digits? To me, that's a good sign that we're really primed for disruption and we're truly in a vulnerable state. Right now, rejection's still in the 2, 3, 4% range. Certainly a good sign that shipper routing guides are holding up pretty well.
Yeah, pretty well. I would say so. That's very impressively low percentage now for quite some time. And again, I think obviously that just makes sense with less volumes in the market, less freight in the market right now. Everybody's in the spot market being so unattractive. Everybody's sticking very closely to that contracted freight. So when you guys are having conversations with your shippers and we're talking about potential changes coming up in the market, right? And maybe not until, maybe something starting at the very end of the year, but really we're probably looking more in 24 at this point. A lot of our shippers are running on 6 or 12-month RFP cycles, right? So what are kind of some of the things, or if you have any advice that you guys give to shippers or even to people participating in this market when they're considering, 12-month contracts right now, knowing that there's going to be some type of volatility happening? Is there anything that specifically shippers can be considering to try to insulate themselves from this?
Yeah, it's a really tough position to be in as a transportation planner, right? Because you sort of have to plan for the worst, but continue to try and capitalize on an environment where you have the pricing power. So it's really a delicate dance as a shipper, right? And especially if you weigh in, building a budget for next year. Like I said, you want to plan for the worst, right? I think looking at what the potential type of disruption we could see is, and planning for that is going to protect you, right? It's going to protect you from, going at the end of the year and saying, oh, I blew my budget out of the water, because the market flipped again, right? To some degree, market flips are predictable. The market is very cyclical. We see it go up and down. I think there certainly is still a question mark if we will see and if true inflationary conditions next year or not, right? My argument would be that we would need some sort of catalyst to spark that. So, I think we do end up seeing it. We do end up seeing a disruption, but it's certainly not guaranteed, right? So, got to plan for that. But like I said, you also have to try and work through how do you continue to offer your business cost savings and opportunity when it's there for you, right?
Yeah, I haven't heard anyone address this that bluntly. And really, I mean, what we're saying here is that this is still right now and potentially for the next several months to 6 months, still a shipper market, right? There's still the opportunity for them to be negotiating lower contract rates. I'm releasing my market update report later today, but you see the same stuff. That contract rate line hasn't come back up yet. It's been steadily working itself down, and that's been a result of people continually working on renegotiating those contracts. And so far, we haven't seen any sign that that's stopping right now. So it's a difficult dance, if you will, to manage right now, because these shippers don't want to leave money on the table because they're trying to do what's best for their organization. But at the same time, knowing that at some point in 12 months, the conditions in this market will start to change. Maybe it just means, lean into those providers that are a little bit more aware of what's going on in the market, or make sure those routing guides are strong in that second and third position as well, right? Kind of insulate yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, your high volume, your critical freight, try and really lock in those providers that you know and you trust and you rely on. Your inconsistent freight, your low volume freight, that's going to be the first stuff that gets given back to you anyway, right? So continue to play the spot market in that environment is probably my best piece of advice. And and you're going to get those cost savings now, and you're probably going to feel the pain if the market flips on those lanes anyway. So
Yeah.
a balanced approach is probably what I would recommend. So,
hey,
yeah.
David, I know we only have a few minutes left, but we just got a great question for you. They said, hey, David, I have noticed you more than some other forecasters have placed more focus on consumer sentiment, which was the right choice given the boom in CPGs during the pandemic-related supply chain shocks. As we go into 2023, what metrics are you looking at for the spot market specific to manufacturing?
Great question. I think in general, you don't have to dig too deep, right? Like, I just think new orders in manufacturing is a good indicator, right? Like, we've seen, I think, 9 straight months of declining new orders and 9 straight months of a declining backlog. Mm-hmm. And so a pullback in the backlog means a pullback in the funnel, which means, that future freight demand is threatened, right? And so I think we need to work on hoping for the new orders to begin to pick back up and fill up that backlog. And that gives us a lot more confidence around consistent demand as we look forward into next year. So as it relates to manufacturing, I think just seeing new orders moving forward, that would be huge. I think disinflation empowers the Fed to lower the interest rate, which drives capital investment and begins to improve new orders in the manufacturing space. I think that's our working catalyst right now is hoping that we see disinflation empower the Fed to lower the interest rate, because we think that's what's going to kick off the next spur of housing activity where it's been soft, single family homes and in manufacturing.
We shall see. We just had a very good jobs data report, and fuel just kicked up with a little bit of inflationary pressure. So we'll see what the Fed's thinking here come September, right? Yeah. David, we only have a couple minutes here. Can you please let everybody know, number one, how can they get your market report on a regular basis? And then where can they connect with you? Is LinkedIn the best place? I don't know. Are you a Twitter person? Like, how can people get a hold of you and keep up with what you're working on?
No, really great conversation today, Samantha. Thank you so much. To reach out for our more regular market insights, you can go to arrivelogistics.com and navigate to our insights page. You can subscribe to getting our monthly shipper insights there. I'm available through that website as well, or here on LinkedIn profile here in the page. So feel free to connect and reach out. I'm happy to speak with anyone about freight market.
Yes. And if you guys are listening to this back, or you didn't catch the whole thing, or you listened to it later, please feel free to come back here to the LinkedIn. If you leave a comment, tag David in it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to jump in, shoot you an answer, or shoot him a message. Any questions about freight markets, economics, that's our jam. So we'll talk about it all day. David, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you making it work with your schedule. And thanks everyone for joining us for coffee.
Thanks, Samantha.